Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us on this crypto exchange series brought to us by Royle. So in this episode we're looking at jurisdictions, regulation and crime and the role that exchanges play in this. And so we're joined here by Alex from Archax, Sachin from Coinfirm, and big thanks to Royle for bringing us this series. So we're just as an overview, we're in a crypto environment at the moment with not as much clarity on regulation, at least in the UK, as many would desire, and not as much efficiency as many would desire in getting that clarity. And just as a first sort of question and a first point to look at the moment, we're very much seeing a time where regulators are trying to say, this is what we need, and almost managing every process rather than letting the industry come up with the best possible outcomes and innovate. Where do you see that going, Alex, and what do you see as needed in that, in how the regulator approaches the outcomes that we would desire, such as money laundering in crypto, for example?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really key point in order to facilitate innovation within the space generally, and that's within and without sort of the UK itself. Regulation should take a policy outcome view, so that and that should be the sole driver. And when we're talking about financial crime, and we're talking about money laundering and terrorist financing, it is to in a ex ante way remove the possibility for money laundering and financial crime. When we have, it feels at the moment that the technology methodologies used to do that are the things that are receiving the most scrutiny by regulators, as opposed to the outcome that is looking to be achieved. And when you take that kind of process and methodology view, that naturally stifles innovation, because you get this anchoring towards what regulators are expecting to see. As opposed to them being open-minded enough to say, right, well, this is new and novel tech. How can we use this and leverage it to solve some of the unsolvable problems that have happened in the past? The prime example, and a lot of people are on the fence about it, but the travel rule, that is a correspondent banking system and control that exists and is being reflected in an environment involving an underlying blockchain, which is immutable and permanent. So you could ask, is it necessary? Is it relevant? Is it rent extraction? They need to take this outcome policy looking view to foster innovation.
Thank you. You got any views on that, Sachin?
Yeah, definitely. It's just as Alex says, in terms of the technology is going to be a barrier, but we're also seeing that it's like, for example, the travel rule. There isn't one complete solution yet, and it will take all of the jurisdictions, everyone who's under the FATF, to actually abide by that one kind of tech solution. So in the industry, we see it's been going on for a while, where we've had to partner with other firms. So now there's Nota Bene, there's OpenVASP. So things are progressing along, but yeah, it's hard. It's hard to keep up with the speed as well. Speed of change, and we have to think as well in terms of the regulators. They also have people to report to, and there's other kind of how can I say? They have other stakeholders. So I mean, when we say jurisdictional arbitrage, we're talking about jumping ship to another country and register our crypto exchange because it's easier. But some people in national governments, they'll be thinking jurisdictional arbitrage as how do we get one over on a nation state in terms of trade leverage and trade embargoes and trade deals. So that's just one thing that I think we've got to put in perspective and look at it from that angle as well.
Yeah, thanks. And Alex, you mentioned stifling innovation, and certainly we're at risk of that. And in the UK, we've already seen several companies leaving the UK and not looking to be based here anymore because of that. And certainly, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, even the main law firms are now advising companies to basically not go anywhere near the UK and to look at settling up abroad. elsewhere and still being able to target UK customers because of some of the delays here. Where do you see the sort of the risk of stifling innovation coming in with regulation, and also with the regulation setup here? We're looking at a system where regulation has been more or less modelled off traditional finance, and of course, one has to feel for regulators to a certain degree that crypto is so new and is evolving so rapidly and has so many of the smartest minds and people and technologies in it that is evolving very, very fast and would be difficult for any regulator to keep up with. But practically, can innovation be achieved here with regulatory barriers still sort of attached to traditional finance, or what is needed, Alex?
Yeah, I absolutely think it can be achieved, and I think that there needs to be a collaborative approach in order to do that between regulators, governments, and most importantly, industry stakeholders themselves. Nothing comes from having an adversarial relationship between people desperate to, undertake business in a jurisdiction and the regulatory and regulators. That picking a fight and having fights is never the thing. But the one interesting thing I see here is that a lot of regulation has grown and existed and developed over time to remove sort of predatory rent extraction, people who will sit in the system and just basically rip people off by virtue of providing a service. And we see a lot of regulations coming out the back of that. Where I think we are currently seeing, or we could get into a world, is that, a lot of reg tech and fintech solves a lot of these problems that regulations have otherwise evolved to solve. So the systems and controls have come in, and in an environment where we have innovative solutions which can provide the same policy and regulatory outcomes by nature of, say, by nature of the underlying technology. I mentioned earlier the immutable and permanency of the blockchain, the ability to see things in real time by engaging with the networks. We enter a space where unnecessary regulation becomes predatory rent extraction in itself. And the rent, by saying, well, we have something that is effectively self-governing, but we're going to put extra rules and these extra high barriers up just because we don't trust the underlying technology. I think that becomes quite a dangerous environment for innovation, and is likely to result in jurisdictional arbitrage, as Sachin said earlier. And to go back to the previous point, the desire and it should be that regulators are open arms, clawing to bring people within any form of perimeter to protect and to have oversight of firms that are soliciting their citizens within their scope,
instead of just letting them go.
Exactly. There is no good outcome from pushing people offshore, when in doing that there is absolutely no barrier to those people then soliciting people within jurisdiction. It's almost it's anathema to what regulators should be doing.
Oh, and just as an example, I was at a fintech related conference recently. We don't need to name any names, but almost a vast majority of companies exhibiting there seem to be offshore, whereas even only a few years ago it was more UK based or locally based companies that were exhibiting there.
Well, maybe it was the weather. Maybe that's why we were offshore. But no, I'm joking. In terms of the, it's funny as well, because what Alex is saying in terms of, the progress with the technology and, how everything is being sped up. It's when you actually see what the FATF are saying, like in terms of the risk characteristics in terms of money laundering for virtual assets, they include things like anonymity, global reach, which is like one thing which we think is a good thing, but that's, for them, it's a risk characteristic, transaction speed as well, and then mass adoption. So it's funny sometimes that maybe that's the sticking point, but things can go wrong along those lines. But yeah, so we see that as, but compared to fiat, we kind of know that this is a drop in the ocean, to be honest. All of the data shows that, I'd say. I'm not sure, Alex, you also agree on that?
Yeah, I think, it's a trick. Yes, it is factually correct. It's a tricky argument to say, though, that, just because it is a smaller percentage of something means that we should care about it less, when, it's an issue, and the issue needs to be addressed, but the issue won't be addressed by not addressing the actions of global regulators and the attitudes towards it and the rhetoric that's coming out of it. There's a bit of a link with, we've seen this, the meme stocks and the AMCs and the GameStops, and this kind of, there's this growing sense of a kind of a rebelling of a disenfranchised part of society, perhaps, where they've grown up post GFC, low rates, no yield, all of this kind of stuff. By saying no, you're not going to stop anything. In fact, you're going to,
you're just push it deeper underground, or push it into a more eccentric dog-shaped meme coin.
Well, it's like the irony here is that we seem to kind of be in a space where people trust. There was, I think, the FCA, or there was a report very, very recently that said something like a material proportion of, I think it was, 18 to 35-year-olds get stock advice from Reddit and TikTok. That was the main place that they got their stock advice, whereas, the generation above that, in it said, the same proportion got it from newspapers. So you can just see where, where society, or where cohorts of society pin their trust. And I'm just, I think the thesis here is that the regulators need to move with that, not rebel against it, because the reason why we're here is because of a distrust. And if there is this natural distrust, you need to engage with the reason why, not just say no.
You've mentioned jurisdictional arbitrage a couple times. How can that be mitigated? What do you see as the answer to that?
I think we've mentioned it, and Sachin mentioned it, more than me. But the work of FATF and similar kind of organisations is crucial, and getting getting buy-in for that, and engaging with all the recommendations. With that, I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah, I would say that as well. It's definitely going to take collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. So I suppose first we're going to have, specific guidelines which are communicated to everyone from FATF, FATF, and then we need the actual, the member states for them to implement it, and then we have to see the kind of the private sector adoption. But there needs to be this whole cooperation along the public, private sector, and international cooperation. So it's many steps. Many things can go wrong, but I mean, communication has opened up. We work with regulators. I mean, Alex himself, we used to work in the FCA, right? So they're not all bad. So I know we like to always talk about it like doom and gloom, but it's a good, it's a good. It's a good sign that we're here actually discussing it, right? Like that's the we can take merit in that. So it's interesting times, and things are changing for the better, I'd say, for sure.
I think there's another sort of interesting layer as well, which is, we can look at the FX market, and we have the FX global code, and that's not something that's kind of steered by a regulator. It's not that kind of, it's almost like an SRA kind of approach, where the industry has taken the actions of the industry and by the scruff of the neck and said, right, well, this is how we want our industry to evolve. This is what we're going to do. And I think the same thing should happen, within the broader crypto market. We kind of got to realize it's a very, very immature market. Yes, it's huge, 3 point whatever it touched the other day, 3.2 trillion. But in terms of how long it's been around, it's a very, very immature market. And I think, to your point, Sachin, now we're starting to see elements and of maturity come into it, and these conversations, more and more conversations are having. We're seeing material owners of, some of the largest exchanges coming out and, seeking legitimacy via regulation in order to pursue what will ultimately be things like, the commercial markets and things like that. So, I agree, it's all a step in the right direction, but we need oversight, and the industry has a massive responsibility as a stakeholder in its own success to drive that forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the recent suggestions, which has been made by quite a few people, is there needs to be sort of one regulator for all of crypto. Coinbase has recently suggested that amongst numerous others, and certainly I'd say one of the downfalls in crypto is the lack of any sort of independent third party. And if you talk to crypto companies, some of them will try and get sort of independent auditors to check their tech and sort of give them a green tick, but they're hardly so neutral or independent. They charge a lot of money, and you arguably can be bought for that. And even recently we saw one of the so-called independent auditors effectively exit scam and to charge a lot of money and then leave and not be honest themselves. So the system we've got now isn't perfect. I mean, would you say that is the answer, having one sort of regulator and one independent auditor and industry standard?
Just speaking from early experience of starting off a career in Deloitte, someone needs to always watch the auditor, and it's it's all about competition. I'm not too sure about just having one. I mean, who decides who the one would be? It's I think we all know how that would go, but maybe some kind of, I mean, when we look at the technology and what this whole thing is about, it's decentralization, people having an equal right and a say in what happens and what affects their lives. So why can't we all be? And one day maybe we're all going to be VASPs. Under certain definitions, we all are. And then obviously then there's a risk of peer-to-peer, which is always coming up now. How can we mitigate that risk? And it's a tough one, to be honest. But in terms of just conglomerating into one, no, I'm not too sure. I mean, maybe a two-party, but that doesn't work either. So multiple stakeholders is the best way, I'd say. But have one kind of metric and one goal in mind, like what is it we want to improve and what do we want to achieve? Not just what can we block or what fires can we put out? Like where are we going in terms of progress? Are we actually getting it? Are we getting there faster? Maybe not.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think if you look at the likes of Europe and the States, even under those kind of structures, you still have sort of a federal arrangement. In the States, under one country, you've got different laws and different markets, and I think when you try and centralize control in that kind of sense, you always end up getting into kind of human emotion related arguments and things like that. I think the best results generally are market driven results, and the market and the community needs to kind of find out where it will be and be able to hold itself to account. We're starting to see it now, and you can argue both ways, but when you have recent hacks of networks and then all the funds are returned, okay, admittedly for whatever reason is gonna make someone do that, that's unheard of in the traditional world. So in a way, that's a use case for the fact that the market can self-govern. So maybe there's some kind of new paradigm shift there. I think the market as a whole doesn't quite know what good looks like yet. I think that's one of the biggest problems. Regulators and market participants don't quite know what good looks like. And when you don't know what good looks like, everyone's all over the place, and you get this sort of, you sort of get in the situation that we might feel like we're in now. But I think generally everything's moving in the right direction. It certainly feels, in the UK in particular, it feels like a bit of a pressure cooker at the moment. It feels like there's an awful lot more good news, good stories, good innovation, good outcomes that are being shown within the space. the rhetoric's changing, the narrative's changing from the majority. Some people still seem to, die, are going to die on their hill in terms of all crypto is evil. But I think even that will start changing, changing in time.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's fair to say, at least I like to see that the vast majority of companies are doing some incredible things and really, revolutionizing how a lot of systems and setups work, which is great. And then also when you look at crypto crimes, they're not necessarily about crypto. It's often opportunists just taking advantage of the excitement caused by crypto rather than being directly due to crypto at fault per se. But we've got to touch on the fact that crypto crime does still exist. There's some enormous hacks and Ponzi schemes and scams in space and exit scams, but then also you've got the role that crypto does undeniably play in ransoms and smuggling and human trafficking and drugs trade and so forth. And that isn't just digital, that affects a lot of sort of real life humans and a lot of real life situation. Is there a role where a lot of partnerships with other organizations such as the anti-human trafficking network, for example, could play? Is that the answer to reduce a lot of crime and hopefully reduce the victims that are affected?
I would say yes. Yeah, for sure it is. And it's not just that with the partnerships as well. It's the industry as well needs to come together, right? It's and this comes back to about having like one party or there's always the hindrance to progress is vested interest, right? And that's what we see with the what's going on with the battle for exchanges, and vested interest will kind of stop, But when the example that Alex said before about white hat hackers actually giving something back, like what was their vested interest? It was generally for for society to give them a thumbs up and kudos. It wasn't to monopolize and have that monopoly for a long time. What the predatory rent extraction. I love that phrase. Actually, I'm gonna use that on my landlady. Actually, she wants to up my rent. But yeah, yeah, definitely. And just also in terms of the education, regulators need to get educated. The private sector needs to get educated on how the regulators speak and how they interact. So something needs to be done along those lines. I think that's really going to be fundamentally the key to unlocking progress because it's everyone communicates in a different way, and different groups sometimes they just don't go on well together. So someone needs to be an intermediary. People need to be educated so that they can protect themselves. Exchanges, all kind of VASPs, they should work together in terms of getting the illicit actors out. We've already proved it. Can you imagine if a crypto crime was actually higher than fiat crime? What would we be talking about then? So we don't want to get in that situation, right? It's we've shown how clean it is, and we're going to keep it more and more cleaner, hopefully. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
Thank you. And Alex, because of time, but if you've got a last viewpoint on that.
On the education piece, I think that is absolutely key. But part of that education piece, there's an awful lot of education and effort being spent educating on the crime, criminality, fraud piece, and what we can do to prevent that. And I think it would be good to really start educating senior stakeholders, regulators, policymakers on actually the benefits that this technology can bring, the disintermediation, the financial inclusion benefits, and the societal benefits that engaging with this can bring. And if you can balance that argument naturally, and so that the narrative starts turning from, right, well, how do we stop all this bad stuff, to, okay, let's look at what the good stuff does, and then balance that against the bad stuff, we will start to see that actually the technology itself it's non-autonomous, it's not inherently evil, it's bad actors in exactly the same way as the traditional world.
Yeah, no, it's true. Crypto crimes aren't unique in any way, really, except for different use of technology. Sachin and Alex, thank you so very much for joining us and sharing your amazing viewpoints on that. We could speak for a lot longer. Also, thanks to Royle for bringing us the series on crypto exchanges, and huge thanks to you both for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.